I grew up fatherless. I couldn't tell you at which point I realized I would grow up without a dad, because my father had never really been around since I was about 5 years old. And although there was always the hope that he would come back at some point, I think part of me already knew for a very long time. But there was one moment in my childhood that made it very clear that I would grow up without a dad. It was in the summer, and my brothers and I all decided to go camping for the weekend. So we drove up to the Lake District, and when we got there, we set up a tent, and we went on our first long walk through the beautiful scenery. We got back a little bit before sundown and arrived at a lake. And so we set up a barbecue there and talked about life, cherishing these precious moments where we got to be together, all four of us. Even when the sun went down and we got back to our tent, we were still playing cards under a starry sky until late into the evening, before eventually going to bed to get ready for another day of hiking. I remember waking up the next day before the sun had actually come up yet. I could hear my brother right outside the tent whispering lightly. And since the sun hadn't come up yet, I didn't think much of it, and I went back to sleep. But before long, he came back. We packed up our tent, we got in the car, and we drove away. My brother had just received a phone call to tell us that our father had passed away that night. That little bit of hope that he would come back, it was gone now. And gone were the days of me staring out the window on my birthdays waiting for him to show up, or looking for his face in the crowds at my rugby games, hoping that he might have come to see me. Those days were over, and it was time for me to move on and accept the fact that I would be growing up without a father. Now that was 5 years ago, and since then I've gone through countless things without him. I've had medical problems that have kept me out of school for months. I've gone through countless exams, countless projects. In fact, my mother even had a stroke last year, and he wasn't there for any of it. Throughout my childhood, I've come to understand just how profoundly important fathers are. And even in the moments where all I could say for myself was that life goes on, even then, somehow, growing up without a father has also showed me things that I otherwise wouldn't have noticed. They've allowed me to appreciate certain things in life that otherwise would have taken me years to realize. And even though these lessons and insights into life were painful to learn, I know that they make my life more cherishing every day. And today, I'd like to share these with you. I wake up at 4 o'clock every morning. Sometimes this is more like 5 o'clock, depending on what I'm doing, but it's always early. And when things get difficult and work starts piling up, I go running in the morning. I get up at 4, I put on some clothes, I walk out the door, and I start running. Now at 4 o'clock in the morning, it's cold outside. And the first thing I feel is the cold wind hitting my face. And sometimes it's so cold that it hurts, but it's a great way of waking up. So I keep on running, and I run past houses where not a single light is turned on. And it's just me, on my own, in a city that's still deep in its sleep. Once I get past the houses and the apartment blocks, I arrive at the woods. In the woods, there are little street lamps here and there lighting up the path. But at this time, my main source of light is the light reflecting off the moon. Now I won't lie to you. At 4 o'clock in the morning when I'm running alone in these woods, it's not just that I'm cold and I'm tired, it's also that I'm scared. I'm in the middle of the woods all on my own, and if something happens to me, I have no way of protecting myself. There are certain parts where I'm terrified, because there's this one part of my run where it's not just that there's not much light, it's that there's no light. I can hear my footsteps, but I can't see my feet hit the ground. The path I'm running down is pitch black. I can't see a thing except for the moonlight through the branches of the trees above me. Almost as a direct consequence of growing up without a father, I've dealt with depression for a large portion of my childhood. This is what it felt like. I was alone, scared, lost, and I couldn't see much. It felt like there was a complete absence of light. I remember days where I was sat down as a kid thinking thoughts like, is it my fault? Is there something wrong about me that made my father leave? Am I the reason for my family's suffering right now? However irrational it is, when a kid is abandoned by their father, they will start thinking these things, and when they do, it will get dark, and it will feel like there is a complete absence of light. Yet, there is light. When I'm running down this pitch black path at night, I can't see anything around me except for the moon, and so I look directly towards it. It's pretty much the only way I can tell where I'm going, and so I run in a straight line towards it. And even though I can't see where I'm placing my feet as I'm running, I know that if I go in the direction of the moon, I'm going the right way. And so I run. And I run even though I'm terrified, and I run further, and at some point I make it out of this scary part. And the tree line ends, and I arrive at a lake. And now, the light reflecting off the moon also reflects off the surface of the lake. I keep the shimmering surface of the lake on my right, and I run a little bit further, but I have a better idea of where I'm going now. And at some point, I make it back to the street lamps, and then I can see clearly again. And if I run up a hill, I get to a point where I can look back at that gorgeous lake, and so I sit down there for a few minutes. And I remind myself at the start of the day that every once in a while, to be able to get to this beautiful point, I had to run through darkness. And I had to be okay with the fact that I didn't know exactly where I was. And importantly, I had to trust that if I ran towards the light, however dim it was, I had to trust that the closer I got to that light, the more light there would be. That summer, when my father passed away, he was in a hospice. It was clear that he wouldn't recover. He had been diagnosed with cancer. At first, when I got the news, I didn't want to see him. I was filled with rage and disappointment. But it was only after a long time trying to convince me that I realized I had to see him just one last time. I had to have my final goodbye. So I was hoping, maybe, after I saw him this last time, I would be at peace. I distinctly remember the moment where I was walking through the hospice while talking to a nurse, and at some point we turned the corner, and the nurse pointed to the end of that corridor and said, "That's where your father is." I was terrified, and suddenly the corridor became very narrow as the walls started closing in, and I was terrified and my legs started shaking and I was ready to run away, but for some reason I didn't. I kept walking even though my legs were shaking and I had no idea what I would be seeing on the other side of that door. And even though it was one of the slowest walks in my life, I got to his door. And when I opened the door, he turned around and he smiled at me. I hadn't seen that smile in years. I went over to hug him, but I had to hug him in a certain way. He had a tumor the size of a basketball in his stomach. And when I hugged him, I could feel his bones. He was completely pale. I sat down to talk to him, and I thought of things that I could mention, maybe the last Formula One race, or how the rugby was going. But sooner or later, we ran out of things to talk about. Small talk turned into silence, and this silence was deafening. We didn't know what to say to each other. In fact, we could barely look at each other. At a certain point, this silence was too much for my father, and he didn't know what to say to me. So instead, he brought out his laptop and he started working. I came to see my father one last time, hoping for some wise words. Instead, all he could do was work. And that was the last memory I have of my father. Looking back at moments like this, it explains a lot about my childhood. I was always trying to be autonomous, always wanted to be independent, never wanted to rely on people. And when it came to socializing, it's not that I didn't have friends, but I struggled to get close to anyone in a way that they could ever be in a position where they could hurt me in the same way, either through abandonment or rejection. And so I didn't. Any time I got too close to anyone, I ran away. I was petrified. So I isolated myself. And I got used to solitude. And then I fell in love. I've learned a lot from being in a relationship. Sometimes it's been more than hard work. It's been a therapeutic experience because this relationship turned everything on its head. Alan Watts said it best when he said, "The moment you take a step, what an act of faith, because you don't know that the floor won't give under your feet." This captured the fear that I felt every day. Whenever I would get too close to someone, I got worried that they would hurt me again, or they would abandon me. And later, Alan Watts added that love, in essence, is an act of surrender to another person, where you give yourself up and accept the risk of getting hurt. A little while ago, my partner and I were arguing about socks. We were folding some laundry, and at some point she grabbed some socks, thinking that they were hers. And I politely informed her that she was wrong and they were actually my socks, and she disagreed with that. And before long, we were having a silly back and forth, and I just started smiling at her. It was when I was in France, visiting her for over a week, and we were doing everything together. Cooking together, studying together, watching documentaries together. For a short while, we were practically living together. And in this moment, when we were arguing about socks, I couldn't help myself from thinking, look at how far we've come. Our whole story played out in my mind every time we danced together, the times we sang together, all the times where we burst out in laughter, and all of the moments that we shared in pure happiness. While I was smiling at her, I realized that giving myself up like this and accepting the risk of getting hurt, it gave me some of the most beautiful moments in my life so far. Now I'm about to start my adult life. In a few months, I'll be off to university. And now I need to decide how I remember my childhood. Today, when I look back, I see chaos. But as I move on to this new stage of my life, I need to decide how I remember my childhood and what I want to take with me from growing up fatherless. And that's where these insights are important. The ability to trust myself when things get dark and I don't know where I'm going. And the trust that if I run towards the light, even if it's dim, the closer I'll get, the more light there will be. These are crucial to me, in the same way as I have to remind myself every once in a while to accept the risk that I might get hurt in the name of love. But there's one more to me. It's far more important to me than all of the others. Be a father. Please, please be a father. Even if you're not a father, be a father. Even if you've never had a father, be a father, because we need fathers in this world. I'm not talking about having a kid per se, but I'm talking about being the people who are like fathers to us, because we need you. In my childhood, I was fatherless, but not entirely. Small things made me realize that I wasn't completely without a father, because I found father figures in the people around me in my life. My brothers, my teachers, refugees that I met. They inspired me and taught me things like compassion, kindness, courage, high ideals, what it means to be a great person. These are the things that my father didn't teach me at home. And millions of kids are growing up in households where they aren't being taught these things at home. But it's up to us to make up for that. Because whether you realize it or not, there are fatherless kids walking all around you who need you. And whether you realize it or not, you might mean more to these kids than they will ever tell you, because they look to you to find the things that their father didn't show them. I say this out of experience. Sometimes, when you say something wise or do something kind, please know that there might be a kid in the corner of the room who is ready to give up that day, but whose life has been completely changed by what you've done. So if ever in doubt about what to do in life, be a father. Thank you.